Hi, Michael.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, good. And in Seattle, everything all right?
Yeah, well, just raining as usual.
Yeah, English weather, point.
Yeah.
5 minutes. I should be starting soon.
Yeah, go grab my coffee.
Hey, Benji.
Hey, Michael, how's it going?
Good.
Nice. Oh, long day.
Yeah, for me too. Came back from Manchester.
Yeah, no doubt.
Morning.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Al, how's it going?
Great so far.
Great, great. Happy whatever day of the week it is. Thursday. Happy Thursday.
Yeah.
All a blur. All a blur.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I struggle to believe that a month has gone past already, to be honest.
I
but
don't know how that is happening. It's insane.
it keeps happening every week.
Yeah,
it seems each month passes.
Does
Yeah,
feel
this-
about a week long.
This
Yeah.
this meeting is actually a measurement. Like every
That's
time.
You guys remember that February is the shortest month, and this time it's just exactly 4 weeks. And it's like bam, bam, bam. Oops, here it is again.
Yep, exactly. Definitely ready for spring though. I don't know. I'm surrounded by way too much snow at this point of year, so ready for it to melt.
Really? Where are you?
I'm in Ottawa, Canada. So yeah,
Okay.
we're surrounded by lots of snow. We've had a lot of snow over the past couple of weeks in particular. So
Yeah, okay. In Switzerland, we had the same. Lots
Yeah.
of snow, but I'm snowboarding, so
yeah, I do
It's
too.
good.
Snowboard and ski. And I wish the snow would just stay in the mountains. I'd be happy with that and not in my driveway. So
I can agree with that.
yeah.
That's exactly what we have in Seattle.
Yeah.
No, almost never snow around here. I mean, where people live, but 30 minutes drive,
You can
and
get to
you're
it.
at the ski resort in the mountains.
Yeah. Calvin's on the call as well, and he's in BC. So same thing for him. Yeah.
Yeah, not too far from Seattle.
Yeah. That's nice. You can walk around with a spring jacket on in the winter, but yet get to the mountains for some of the best skiing and snowboarding. It's awesome. So we're just missing Lee, it looks like.
I saw him pushing something to the repository, so he
Yeah.
should be soon there.
Should be here soon. Yeah.
Did you like just merge the speaking on behalf of the project thing?
Oh, was that merged?
Yeah, it looks like it's.
Oh,
realized
yeah, it's
not-
gone. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was there a few minutes ago. So yes. Yep. There we go.
Hey, folks. Sorry for being a couple minutes late.
We saw you merging things, so we knew you were around.
Yep. Lost track of time for a sec. How's everybody doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Good.
Let me get stuff organized here for a sec. Let me see if I have any other pull requests open. I don't think that I do. Let me pull up our agenda doc for today.
And the live notes as well, please, Lee.
Ah, geez, there I go again. Yep, I'm gonna get you some live notes. I've got no excuse this time because I literally put something in my calendar that says review agenda, add notes doc. And I reviewed pull requests instead. So there you go.
That's some progress.
Not entirely off the reservation. It's not quite on track either. All right, there's this one. Getting our live notes doc set up. I don't know if you guys saw this. I wrote a tweet a couple days ago. GraphQL turned 10 years old. How crazy is that?
That's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Wow.
Time has just flown by.
Yeah, obviously not all of that has been open source. A significant part has been open source.
Yeah. That's wild.
But I had a text message thread with Nick and Dan, and their conclusion was that it just makes us feel old.
But is it 10 years since you had the idea to it, or since you had it
10
already used?
10 years since we had, it wasn't named GraphQL yet, but there was like real code up for review that was, you know, the Pareto rule, right? Like the 20% of meat that gave 80% of the thing that is GraphQL was really there. Plenty of stuff has changed since then, but that I would say, like, yeah, 10 years since the spark that sort of set off the major effort. All right, now I got our notes stock, putting it in the agenda file. I will share that in the chat too, just so you don't have to go hunting for that. There's our notes. All right, we have a fair amount of stuff to talk about today as well, so let's get into it. Sorry again for being a little bit late. All right, to kick us off, by being here, we all agree to our membership agreement, participation guidelines, contribution guide, and code of conduct. Links in the agenda as per usual, in case you ever want a quick review over those. Contribution guide in particular, pretty great doc. Some of those other ones are a little more legal mumbo jumbo. Contribution guide, I'm proud of that one. Anyhow, let's do a quick round of introductions, names to faces for all the folks in the room here. And then we'll go over our agenda. We will go in the list as it is found in the agenda file. So that is me first. Hello, everybody. My name is Lee.
Hi, my name is Michael.
Alex, are you here?
Yep, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I'm Alex.
I don't know if I see a drone here.
Hey, Rob.
I am Roman.
Do we have Yakov here today?
Hi, Yakov here. Sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Hi, I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Jordan, working on Relay at Meta.
Hi all, Hugh here.
The next one is here, Morrison.
Doc, are you here?
Yes, I'm Doc. Hi,
Welcome.
thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Uli from the guild. Nice to be here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Anthony. This is my first meeting with the working group. So for those of you who I haven't worked with before, I am the iOS, or one of the iOS engineers over at Apollo. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Hey everyone, my name is Kelvin. Same situation as Anthony, first working group meeting, and I'm his counterpart on the team, so happy to meet you all.
Welcome both of you.
Hey everyone, I'm Benji.
All right, did we miss anybody? Anybody on the call who's not on the agenda file yet? I think we got everybody. And then also want to acknowledge that Yvonne is not here today. I checked in with him earlier. He says that he's okay. Obviously some crazy shit going on in his hometown, but he's in Lviv, which is one of the more safer cities. I don't know if you could call any of the cities there safe at the moment, but he's pretty close to Poland and he says he's doing all right. But not able to come today, unfortunately. But I'll keep checking in on him.
Can also not leave the country, huh? All men are not.
You can't. No,
Yeah.
but the really good news, he did get the rest of his family out of the bad parts of Ukraine. So they're actually all on the way to him right now, which is great to hear.
Oh, that's great news.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. I think last time I talked to him, he said that was something that he was working on. So.
Yeah. It sounds like it's almost completely done, which is great.
Well, obviously we miss Yvonne and hope that he's safe. Okay, let's take a quick look at our agenda. We'll do a quick look through our past action items, see if we've got anything that we can close out or that needs discussion there. Client controlled nullability, we got a lot of stuff to talk about here. Fantastic. Defer and stream update from Rob, and then a little bit of a discussion on graphical lead maintainers, which that'll be an interesting discussion as well. Anything that's not here that we should talk about? Alrighty, date. This is the set. Let's take a quick look at our action items. I have no issues labeled ready for review, but if I go to that second link, which is all open action items by when they were last updated, do we have anything here? Some of these got a little bit of update after the last meeting. Maybe we can just look at some of these most recent ones to see if any of these need something new from us or can be closed out. Maybe it'll be helpful if I share my screen really quick. This one right here. All right, can you guys see my browser? Cool. Okay, so we'll just go through these together really quick. Review default value quotient spec text, additional alignment report with ref implementation. Okay, this one's still on me. That's just a final review. One of input objects in GraphQL JS. Benji, do you know what's going on with this these days?
There's an initial implementation, which looks good from a quick scan, but I haven't had time to actually do a deep review of it yet.
Okay. We will leave this open so that we don't forget about it then, but that's awesome to see progress. And this next one, raise a PR for preventing skip and include on a subscription. Benji, are you just gonna let this sit on Yvonne for now, or is there something else we can do here?
It was on the root, right? On the root field of a subscription.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember.
I don't think it's a particularly high priority, so I'm happy to just leave it for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember if this was one that is this a gap between spec and the reference implementation, or did we need to write something for the spec as well?
I've already written the spec pull request. Yeah, it's linked there. It's just we haven't implemented it. From what I recall of GraphQL JS, and this is this was back in the 15 branch because I've not had a chance to work on it for a while. There's a lot of oddities in the way that GraphQL JS is validating the subscription stuff. So I think there may be some extra checks that are needed. It all comes down to the difference is basically validating with or without variables.
Yeah,
is the issue, and the fact that subscriptions can only have one field, but skip and include make that complex. And I think it tries to leverage the regular. I think what it does is it fakes a execution context, but effectively it just like provides no variables. So it's not quite right how it works currently. So
okay.
Anyway, what I'm saying is there's some complexity there, I think.
Yeah. I think I'm remembering now our past discussion that was around this proposal and a desire to make it not complicated in that way, to find the simpler solution that got the same end result.
Yeah,
okay.
and I don't think there's really any need for skip and include on the root selection set. So it's basically just adding a validation rule to stop at that from being possible.
So you mean at the moment it does special validation logic, so to essentially find out if something, if a subscription is skipped, or what do they do at the moment?
So what it does is, because it does the field collection to find out that there's only one field, and it does it respecting skip and include, but obviously it's done during validation, so it doesn't actually have access to the variables. So it's done using skip and include, just assuming that none of the variables are present, even if the variables are required. So there's some weird complexity. There's some weird things going on.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's the validation rule that says you have one field, and then that validation rule has to right now fake an execution context, which is something that ideally it should not have to do. Part of the reason why it has to do that is you could potentially put variables there. So we want to shift from, instead of saying after calling collect fields, there's one field, we want to say have some simpler version of doing that would not require an execution.
Exactly.
Is that maybe there because you also want to have the field merging applied? Essentially, if you have fragments, or is it not even possible with subscriptions?
Yeah, you can have fragments on subscriptions as well, and that is part again of where GraphQL JS handles that specific case in subscriptions in a very weird way, I remember. So from a simple point of view, if we just forbid skip and include directives at that level, specifically on that one selection set and any fragments that are spread in it, then we get rid of the problem, basically. It doesn't actually cause, like, it's not a vulnerability or anything like that, because we revalidate during execution that there was one field after the collect fields. So it is checked, but it allows things through validation that are not necessarily, or can be seen that they are likely to be invalid later. It just doesn't really make sense. And I don't think there's any need for skip and include at that point. It just doesn't really make sense.
Right. Okay. Well, if anyone is so motivated to pick this up, I think it will be good for us to, I know this one has not been the most urgent RFC, but it's also not necessarily the most complicated. So if anyone's motivated to make some action on this, I think that would be good. Thanks for the rehydration of the brains, Benji. Okay, I'm not going to go too far down this list. I think there's a handful from November that are everyone review. So maybe just a quick reminder that there's a couple PRs and RFCs that could use some feedback. Projects. Yeah, okay. We've got a handful open that are still quite old, but I don't think we need to dive too deep into that for now. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and we can move on. Alex, I can hand it to you.
Alrighty, I'm gonna screen share and put together a little thing for this. I think y'all are gonna see my speaker notes and know that, you know, magic isn't real and it's all scripted. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So since the past meeting, Yvonne was able to get out Canary releases. They're working great. They get released on NPM. You can use them today if you want. And I started integrating into Apollo's client. They've been kind enough to help me to get something together that they could possibly release in their 1.0 release. We're working out the details still, but been very helpful. And I have test passing and it's generating the code I would expect with the current implementation. Before I get too deep into it though, I want to make sure that we have a set of behaviors on client controlled nullability that people can be confident in. We're going to do today is try to reach some level of consensus on the broad strokes of the proposal. What we decide will be implemented in GraphQL.js and used for experimental releases of clients and servers that choose to support client-controlled nullability. We're going to do a brief overview of the proposal for people who aren't familiar. We're going to review the current positions of the working group members who have participated in the client-controlled nullability discussions. We're going to go over the goals of this discussion, and then we're going to present on each of the discussions that have been posted, go through each behavior, talk about, I'll go over the structure of that in a bit. And then once we have a set of things that make sense, we can go on to next steps. If this goes too long, we can wait for the next one too, but I'm hoping to get through it today. So a real quick, brief overview of what this is. Client-controlled nullability is a proposal to add syntax to the query language that allows us to say something to the effect of, I know that this field may come back null. If it comes back null, it does not work for my feature. My view won't render, my component doesn't work, something like that. So I want to treat this like it is non-nullable. That's useful for us when we're doing code generation. It makes it clearer what the person writing these queries wants out of them. And the main driver of this is people at Yelp where I work. One of their main usability complaints was that they had to write wrappers and unwrap each individual field to make sure it wasn't null before this stuff was usable. I've written up a document. I will link it in the chat. Where is the chat? Oh, there's the chat. I went through all past discussions and tried to figure out what individual people's positions are. So if you want to find yourself in this list and verify that what I've written here is still your actual positions on things, you can feel free. Everybody should have edit rights, so you can feel free to update these as we go. It'll help me guide discussion and talk to people about this stuff later if there's still certain concerns. So that'll be helpful for me.
Where's the link to that?
I just sent it to the Zoom chat.
Got it.
Cool. Okay, cool. So the goal of today is not to find the behavior for client-controlled nullability that everybody loves, but to find the behavior that will work for the most people. Your favorite behavior might not be picked for development, but the aim is to avoid picking behavior that doesn't work for your use case. Because of that, we're going to focus. Okay, sorry, VS Code was asking for permissions for some reason. Because of that, we're going to focus discussion primarily on critiques. And each discussion will start by asking if any of the options on the table are hard blockers. I'm not asking if you dislike any of the options. I'm asking if any of the options will cause you or your users to be unable to use client-controlled nullability. I'm hoping that by doing this, we can temporarily end discussion on unpopular options. It's very common engineering mindset to explore all possible options, even if the engineer doesn't personally back some of them. But that's not what we're trying to do today. Moderating discussions like this is very time consuming for me. So it'd be great if we can abandon some of them. If the feedback is core after the experimental releases have been in production for a while, then we can reassess, but at least then we'll have some concrete experiences to work from. And lastly, I'd like to feel people to feel like the experimental releases of client-controlled nullability aren't based on unilateral decisions that I've made. I want people to feel like they've had the opportunity to be part of the decision-making process, and I'm hoping that this creates some confidence in what gets released. So now we're going to go into each of the behaviors. I'm going to tightly control the time that people speak on this. So if I cut you off, I'm sorry, but we're going to try to get through a lot here. So it was decided pretty early on that we want to be able to control the nullability of elements within a list in addition to the list itself. The following are the proposed syntax options. The first is this bracket syntax, where list depth is defined by a number of brackets in the syntax. Can everybody read this, by the way? Is it big enough? I don't. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so there's this bracket syntax that defines the depth, and then we put the client-controlled nullability operators at various levels in the list depth. There's the sequence of modifiers. This can be applied from the outside in or the inside out on a list. And we have the arrow or as syntax. We can decide on specifically what we want, but this one would involve basically restating the type of the field. This one would change non-list syntax in addition to list syntax. So real quick, I want to try to save us a little bit of time. We have a public vote where the bracket syntax has more votes than all other options combined. There's nearly 40 votes here. It's enough that I'm comfortable deciding on something and avoiding discussion. So I want to see if anyone would object to ending discussion and going with the bracket syntax and moving on to the next behavior, or if any of these options are going to be hard blockers for you or your use case.
I think in the voting, we didn't have the option to say, don't worry about inner list items.
Oh, okay.
So that's the only, like, I think the actual syntax, I don't particularly care, but I think the question of do it or not and have that be a blocker for the rest of the nullability project is the real question in my mind.
So you're saying essentially, if we cannot rewrite the inner type, just essentially the outer type is forbidden.
Yeah, yeah. It's either the list itself is non-nullable, or like that's the only option you have, at least when we start.
Does anyone here support that as the direction they want to go with this? Because like Alex said, if no one actually supports that, then we can move past it.
I think, yeah, we should hold that as a backup unless if there isn't good consensus here, like if we feel like we haven't cracked this one, it's always reasonable. Like it's not that painful to set down this problem and come back to it later if we had to. But I'm kind of with Alex. It seems like you've got, I think my opinion here is that you could pretty easily rule out the middle two options just because just the fact that they're easily confused with one another seems like a plainly obvious reason to disqualify them. I know some people voted for them, so I don't know, maybe that's slightly controversial. You can let me know if I'm far off there. But my sense is that we're really looking at the top and the bottom one, in which case feels stylistic to me more so than anything else. I don't know. I like your pitch, Alex. I think it's the right one.
I have one question, which is if the top one is an option is valid on something, would it also be valid to just have the question mark?
Would it also be yes. Yeah. So the way it's implemented right now is that you can either okay, sorry. The way it's implemented right now is you need to match the list depth of the field. We can talk about like the details of this if we want to, but yeah.
Maybe there's some subtlety here, which is like you're actually looking at two separate threads. One is, do you want to disqualify some of these competing branches.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that you've answered all possible questions for the one branch that you want to keep exploring.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's what I'm going for. The discussions we have here are they'll like their impact on the way this works and the way it's implemented are pretty broad. Like if we go with some of the null propagation options, then I'm going to have to change the implementation pretty dramatically. So I'm mostly interested in like, yeah, can we pick one? We can figure out the details later, but if we can discount a few of them. Cool. Great. I'll go in. It sounds like people kind of want to discuss this. Is there more people want to say? I'm going to start a timer just to keep track of these things.
Yeah, if we have to go with one, I have no problem with going with the first one. So that, given I was the naysayer a few minutes ago.
I would vote for number 4, the last one. It looks like we are overriding type. It will be much more clear if we, even if it's a repeat and it's implied that it's int there, then just it should represent a client controlled type, sort of, and it should look like a type.
But you
decoration, not just these squiggly wiggly brackets.
But this implies you could also change the type.
No, it doesn't. It can be, but some repeat, some redundancy is often helpful. And from the point of view of the server, for me, for example, it's much easier to have, it will be the same parsing, function for a normal type declaration or this in this case.
And just want to point out a couple of things. One is, last time we talked about this, we identified that the syntax you're seeing on the screen here is the extreme corner case, that we should expect 95% of use cases to not even address list nullability syntax in the first place. And for those that do, it will be exceptionally rare to go more than one level deep. So that's really the syntax that we should be looking at, is one level deep. But I do want to point out, Alex, to your point about specifically, rather than looking for preferences, looking for constraints, this fourth option would introduce a new way in which a query could be broken, because this would require the type listed in the query and the type in the schema to match. And there are cases where the type name in the schema may change that today would be risky, but not necessarily breaking. And this would expand the surface area where that could break. And that, I think we should hold as a, I don't know how significant of a constraint that is, but it expands the constraint surface.
That, along with, I do think this looks like a typecast. This is syntax that's used in other languages for typecast. And the having the type in there, yeah, it currently doesn't really have any actual impact other than the fact that it can break.
That's my issue also with it. It looks like a typecast, but it is not a typecast, and we are encoding the type in the query. Whereas you could introduce, start with int on the backend and maybe have a named version of int later. That is a semantical int, and it wouldn't break your query.
Cool. Anything else?
So yeah, what Lee said just now was basically we won't have to worry about this in the majority of cases, but that doesn't seem to mesh with what you said just now, Alex, that the depth does have to match. So if you have a list field, you have to specify square brackets, exclamation point, close square brackets, exclamation point. And I think for many people, they might just want to add exclamation point or question mark and not have to worry about the list depth. However, if we're going to allow that, then that's where the same kind of ambiguity comes in that the middle two options have. If you have a list field and you only add an exclamation point to it, are you making the inside or the outside of it you know, the exclamation point. So it's got the exact same problem unless you do enforce the list depth, in which case we're always having to put the square brackets on any list field, which is less than desirable, but acceptable.
Yeah, it would be any list field that is altering its nullability of the field itself or its elements. So a list field where you're not using client controlled nullability would not need the square brackets. I've gone with sort of the strictest implementation for a lot of these options, just because I want to start there and then we can loosen things. But yeah, I see what you're saying, Benji, for sure.
Yep. I don't know if I love that it's the specific iteration that we have for this right now. That's why I wanted to make sure that we could split this into two decisions. One decision is, do we want to narrow this down to one branch to go explore? And the second decision, which it sounds like we've got more room to figure out, is do we have the right point within that branch at present? And we might not yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. We're about at time. I'm gonna move to a vote. In order to vote, please write which option you would like in the chat. If you're submitting proxy votes, I've allowed people who have already participated in discussion to submit votes through other people in their org. If you're doing that, please submit it through the chat and then we'll tally them up.
Who's recording these votes?
I can. Do you want me to record it in the live notes?
That would be ideal. Yes. Thanks.
Sweet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did everybody get their vote in? Anyone still voting? Cool. It looks like option 1 has it. All right.
So just to be clear, are we now resolved that we are including list syntax, list nullability syntax, or is there still a question of like, we're going to use option 1 if we do this, but we may not do list syntax?
That's right. Yeah. I think we're mostly in agreement that that top option is the one that we'd like to explore instead of the other three.
Okay.
But we still need to make sure that there's some variability in that design space as well. And if we can't find one that works, then to the point earlier, I think it's not completely unreasonable that we like scope it out of the proposal for the short term.
Yeah, I understand the complications there. I think that the one thing I just want to say is that I feel strongly that list nullability syntax is an important part of this feature to actually fulfill the intentions of it for client projects. And I don't actually care what we choose as the syntax, but I just feel strongly that we should include this list nullability syntax.
Okay, cool.
I'm with you. I think it'd be hard to explain what we're up to. Like I can imagine people immediately having the question of like, wait, what about this one specific case where I have a list of things? So yeah, that's definitely part of the reason why we're talking about it.
I haven't heard a strong objection to having list syntax in the thing yet. If there is one, yeah, I don't know, we can talk about it afterwards. Maybe it exists, but I haven't heard it yet. So I'm gonna proceed with putting it in and using the bracket syntax.
Yeah, I think Alex, the way you'd want to think about this is if all of your other threads have resolved and this list one is the last one going, and you're like, man, if only I didn't have to deal with that list syntax thing, then we could just ship this. Like that would be the mode when you'd want to make a serious consideration about whether to cut it loose. Okay, we're close to that though. So
cool. Next up, null propagation. I think this one will be nice and spicy. So what's going on here? So right now, if you define a field as non-nullable in SDL, and it comes back null, then nulls will propagate to the nearest non-null or the nearest nullable parent. That's just how it works right now. This is up for discussion because people have some concerns about accidentally wiping out child or sibling or parent fields when something comes back null, even if you expect to come back null and you're prepared to handle it. Specifically, if you're using a lot of fragments, you're at risk of wiping out fields that maybe you did not intend to. So we got 3 options here. The first one is that the non-nullable designator acts like non-nullable in SDL. Fields are marked with an exclamation point, are treated exactly like non-nullable schema fields. If null is found for one of those fields, then it propagates to the nearest nullable parent. I got some examples. Yeah, so here we have our schema. We have is starred is marked. If is starred comes back null, then it propagates to business, which is non-nullable. And if business were to also be marked, then it would propagate all the way up to data. Okay. We have non-destructive, non-nullable. In this one, the required designator does not change the content of the data field. It only exists to provide information to GraphQL clients. They can choose what to do when a field is marked with a non-nullable designator when it comes back null. Client behavior is likely to differ, but this flexibility can be seen as a positive or a negative. This option would only change the language and validation portions of the GraphQL spec. Fields marked with a bang will have a flag attached to them by the parsing step to indicate that the client believes that they are required, but execution will not change. Then we have null propagates to nearest question mark. Jordan, would you mind talking about this one and why you think it might be good for Relay?
Yeah, I think the reason I was trying to bring this one back on the table is that in Relay, we have 2 flavors of the @required directive. One, which acts basically like the schema bubbling, where it just bubbles to the nearest parent if it becomes null, or the nearest nullable parent. And one which throws, so it blows up the whole component. Far and away, most people are choosing the throw option. This is influenced a bit by the error boundary concepts that React has, where throwing can be, like the blast radius of an individual throw can be relatively contained within an application. But just the fact that about like 90% or more of our usage is specifying this more destructive behavior, where it says, like, look, if this field is missing, I really can't do anything here. And I don't intend to recover. I intend to sort of blow up. I was trying to preserve some method where the syntax could be used within Relay to express that behavior. And I think the other options would sort of leave us with needing to retain some kind of directive for this feature, which is intended to solve the same problem. It also made me wonder whether other clients or users of other clients would want a similar behavior to what Relay throw option is, given that that's far and away what most people choose in Relay. But that may be, again, flavored by React's error handling syntax.
And another point on this, just to kind of is a little bit of history, is originally we were expecting for Relay for the null, basically the null propagation, like treating it like a non-nullable, to be the vast majority of usages. And we were surprised by what product developers actually chose to do in practice.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. We're gonna move to discussion now. These are the discussion options. I'm gonna start by asking if any of the options on the table are no-goes, hard blockers for you or your use case.
I'm sorry, but I didn't really understand what the middle one was.
Yeah.
Like, what does the flag mean? Like, where would it be in the output, or, you know, what does it even do?
Right. So this would change only the parse step of the GraphQL, the GraphQL implementation. It would do nothing to execution. Execution would happen as normal.
Basically, servers wouldn't actually care about the exclamation point modifier. Clients would have to handle it themselves. And if they know that the client control nullability is using the exclamation point, then they have to manually, during their validation of a response, check that field. If it's null, then do some handling themselves and throw an error instead of giving a response object or something.
I completely understand. Yes, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, this also gives them enough information in order to code gen this sort of thing that we're looking for with this.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to mention about this is if we went with a non-destructive, or even if we don't go with this option, clients could implement what I just said, which is checking for the null fields themselves if they have a non-destructive or an exclamation point, so that they are backwards compatible with servers that don't implement or have not yet implemented CCN. So even if you have a server that's not going to handle the CCN validation itself, you could just do client-side validation anyway. And in fact, I think Apollo probably would do that, because we're not going to trust that Apollo client is always being used with Apollo server or a server that does have CCN compliance already built in, at least for like the first year or two.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because I think basically any client that has a normalized store that is shared across multiple queries would need to compile this away and handle it on the client, because when a server response comes back and it's missing data, the sort of source of truth in the normalized store couldn't necessarily be reconstructed. So I suspect that there will be a number of clients that will implement this behavior client side and compile away the syntax.
But I mean, the downside is that you send maybe data that you don't even need. Whereas if you have that in the server, you don't even send data that's broken, where you said, okay, that is non-nullable, and we remove parts of the result. You send less data down to the client.
Yeah, I'm not actually. I don't propose that we take option 2 as the suggestion, the solution. But even if we do one of the others where servers do their own validation of this, I think that, like Jordan said, clients are still going to have to do the validation again, whether or not the server is doing it.
That's true. I mean, even the client needs to, like, if the server doesn't support that syntax, you cannot send that. So you have to normalize the query, actually remove the exclamation marks and send that normalized query.
Yeah, technically you could do this now, except that then you'd be on the hook for having a variant of GraphQL to parse and feed to other tools. But I think back in the day, Relay even kind of considered doing this kind of variant and decided not to in favor of directives. But this, I think this option 2 is just, hey, what if instead of having to write a directive, you could just write a single character? But then you got to explain to everybody what that character means, which might be different per client, and I don't love that.
Yeah, I wouldn't like that. Also because you actually consume then more data in most cases.
Yeah, I think we should rule out option 2. I think we should just rule it out.
I think so.
Entirely.
I think so as
agree.
well. I think it would lead to basically we're stuck with exclamation point meaning nothing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jordan?
Yeah, so I think that this keeps coming back to the way that this feature is entangled with fragment isolation. You brought up at the beginning that like adding an exclamation point in one fragment, if you use fragments, will cause conflicts with other fragments. So you need like additional validation, which dramatically reduces how valuable this feature can be. Similarly with the point I was talking about normalized stores, right? Like different responses share the server, the normalized store having to represent the source of truth on the server, not the source of truth as observed by a single query. So I think this keeps coming back to like the global best outcome is we solve fragment isolation, and then we can do the null propagates to the nearest question mark without it being a terrible foot gun. But that is like a very, like that means we have to block this project on that other potentially larger project, or choose a potentially very dangerous syntax in the short come with the hopes that we'll be able to solve the fragment isolation. So I'm a little bit stuck as to how I want to like advocate here, because I definitely think that null propagating to the nearest question mark is better in the long term, but it is dependent on this other thing which we don't know yet, how, if we're going to solve.
Yeah, I
But
think we need to make sure we break the dependency between those two proposals, because it's not super realistic, right? Like it'll push this really far out, and we also want to make sure that we're making the right decision, that we don't have to go change later.
Yeah, I'm not 100% confident that it is a huge foot gun, given we do already have global validation that like fields merge, like when we merge fields, that they don't have overlap. Like that is itself a foot gun, but like we handle it. So I'm not convinced that the question mark propagation is as big a foot gun in practice, especially given most queries are probably relatively small. Like within Facebook, where we have queries with thousands of fragments on them, yeah, it sucks, but I don't think that's normal.
Michael?
Yeah, I also, so propagation to the nearest question mark, doesn't it just mean to the nearest nullable field? Why do we make that so explicit? Because I thought in the proposal we are introducing either you can put an exclamation mark there or question mark. Question mark makes nullable, but that also means just it propagates to the next nullable field. Or
So there's a little bit of nuance. So propagating to the next nullable field will stop if there is a nullable field in between the just like if the parent of something marked with an exclamation point is nullable, it will stop there. With the propagate to nearest question mark, it will go all the way through. Everything between the exclamation point and the question mark will be blown out if the exclamation point is null.
The question mark in this case is in the query, so it's the next client controlled nullable, explicitly nullable field.
Yeah.
Okay, so that even would blow up a nullable field that came before that.
Yeah.
I'm at this point, I'm in fairly strong support of this last option. It's not where I started. I started at the first option, but after talking to folks, the last one makes a lot of sense to me. I think the most important distinction that I arrived at was for when describing the schema, describing nullability along the schema, it should not be typical that an error occurs. Like if you describe a field as non-nullable and a null occurs under the hood, it's not that like, hey, oh, you got a null, like we're gonna go propagate this error. It's like, no, actually there was data, invalid data tried to come through, and you have to kind of panic at that point and bubble up until you get to the least breakable point. And the client is unaware of that entire situation. That's entirely the server's domain. And the goal should be to have a server that never creates exceptions. We measure that in nines, right? Rather than being able to provably say that you can never have your server break. But this is meaningfully different. Like when you put an exclamation point, if a field says that it is nullable and you put an exclamation point there, you're saying that there's times when the server has very real data output that I want to say that I want to create different behavior for. And I think that's actually pretty different from the server produced error construction. And when doing that, I think we need an equivalent way to then handle that. So, and I think this is part of the reason why the Relay team, upon rolling out this feature via directive and offering basically both of these behaviors, found that people preferred the latter one. Is the latter one gives you control over the end result, where the first one doesn't. The first one just says, we're going to just slurp up that error at the next most level. But that might not be the thing you want. And either you would have to like put exclamation points all the way along the path, all the way to the point where you'd want to have that question mark. Or we use this last one to say anything where the client says, I want to create separate behavior here. The client must also say, and then I want like the other end of that behavior happens. here. I am curious to learn more about the idea that this could be a foot gun. I think that's probably the space that I'm most interested in exploring next. Like, how much of this is really a foot gun? Can we tweak the behavior at all? Or is this about communication and documentation? How bad is that foot gun? But anyhow, I'm in support of this last one for that reason.
Does this last option fix the fragment isolation issue, or the issue of a merge non-null field being propagated from one fragment and there's other fragments that are using the same field and don't have that exclamation point? I'm still struggling with how that should be addressed.
It does not,
it doesn't.
but it does preserve the option value that if when we do have named fragments, we could make fragment boundaries an implicit question mark. And so you would blow up to the fragment boundaries, or we could have some syntax to allow you to do that. So it's not that it potentially aids in it in the short term, but it does offer a sort of global maximum DevX, assuming we can solve both problems.
I see.
Just for clarity, with this third option, if you were to put an exclamation point and have no question marks and it were to be failed, does it just throw out the entire response?
Yeah, I think that's the foot gun that I was alluding to.
But I think that's actually what people have potentially been saying is a desirable thing. Like, if there's going to be any errors, then I don't want any response at all. So interesting.
Right. You're saying, I don't know how to handle this person if you don't give me a name for them. Like, my component, like I'm sending you this query. I need this person's name. I can't handle this as a client.
Can I frame the two potential, because the foot gun space, my understanding is that there's two distinct potential foot guns. And I want to just reframe them and let me know if I'm mischaracterizing these or if there's one that I'm missing. So one foot gun is along the lines of field merging and fragment boundaries. And this idea that if you encounter the same field along, two paths of spreading in fragments, right now, or the behavior of this proposal says those have to have the same client controlled nullability flags on them. Otherwise they won't merge, just to avoid the situation where, one is required and one is an error boundary or something confusing. We don't know how to interpret it. That is a potential foot gun where if you try to mark something as required with an exclamation point, that could produce an invalidation error that you'd then have to go chase down all the various other places where that thing occurs to get them to match. That's one. The other one is this idea of exclamation point and question marks probably needing to show up as pairs. And maybe this one is a documentation problem, like helping people understand what is the behavior that will happen when something occurs here. My pitch is to describe this in terms of try catch, because that's something that most developers are very familiar with. Exclamation point is like a throw, and a question mark is like a catch, or like the try boundary, I guess.
Exactly, but that's exactly the point, Oli. It's not a normal non-nullable.
Right.
It's not
exactly.
Just
in the scenario that we do this bottom one, then exclamation point is not about marking a field as non-nullable. It's about marking a field as required. We'd have to kind of tweak our terminology here, I think, to make it more clear about what was happening. But is that an appropriate characterization of the two potential foot guns?
Jordan says yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I think so, yeah. We could
yes.
also use different symbols. Like if we were to go with option 3, it doesn't have to be exclamation point and question mark if that isn't clear to people what it means.
That's another can of worms. For what it's worth, I like our symbols. Maybe it's just because I've been staring at them for too long.
But then if we are going to this territory about particular symbols, what about going back to the directive? That's clear enough. And we can give it a really meaningful name. I would understand in general, this kind of syntactic shortcuts, like exclamation point, can be a shortcut for actually something like directive. All right.
I'd like to try to not discuss naming or different syntax right now. I'm trying to get like concrete behavior down. We can talk about different syntax once you decide on something, but that's what I'm trying to vote on right now. Are people comfortable going to a vote?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. There's your options. Put your, I'm gonna make a divider so I don't cat. Cool. Oh, someone did it for me. Excellent. Thank you. All righty. Voting. For the people that are saying one or the other, can I ask that you pick your favorite? I don't know how to tally that up.
Just don't tally it. It's fine.
Okay, sure.
Or put a -1 on option 2.
Yeah. Does that become 2 if it's 1 or 3? It's yeah, 1 subtracted from the other.
Getting into like ranked choice voting, something complicated.
Yeah.
I thought about doing ranked choice for this, but it's like there's 2 or 3 options for all these. It's gonna take forever. Doesn't matter.
I mean, none of these are like, written in stone.
Yeah,
this
is all
voting
experimental shipping. This is
helping you, Alex, decide like where to go invest your time next. You don't want to go like down a path that the group broadly disagrees with. So I don't know, maybe you follow that path and ends up being a dead end, but like at least you'll know that we were all with you on the dead end journey. Hopefully that doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's strong signs for 3, or even if you double count the others, there's a strong weight for 3.
Yeah, it looks like 7 for 3, 1 for 2, none for 1. That's actually surprising me. It's not how I thought that vote would go, but
yeah, my vote changed during this conversation.
Yeah, the conversation helped a lot. Yeah.
Mine also.
That's why we're here.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I didn't get what the question mark propagation actually meant, but now understanding that.
Cool. No, I'm cool with that. Lee, how are we doing on time? I think there's 40 minutes for the rest of the agenda. Am I okay to keep going?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, cool.
Let's try to end at 15.
Sure. Yeah, this next one should be quick. I think this is we're talking about having a nullable designator. This would stop null propagation. I think this no longer makes sense to talk about, given that we've decided on 3, because the question mark necessarily marks a field nullable. Yeah, so I think the question mark, I guess it wouldn't do anything on its own, or it would be. I don't actually know.
I don't know if this is a helpful question necessarily. I think your last question is more helpful. Or the other piece is like, based on what we just described, now there's kind of 2 kinds of errors. There's server produced errors and there are client produced errors. And does this error boundary question marky thing only work in the world of the client error space, or is it both? And maybe that's a more interesting question to ask, and like, I don't know, maybe we want reading material for people to think about that first.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna skip this discussion just because I think the previous choice makes things not make sense. But we can come back to this at a later date if there's still questions about it. All right, error handling. This one, yeah, it was a good one. Okay, so why are we talking about error handling? During discussion about client-controlled nullability, it came to light that many clients deal with GraphQL errors by throwing out entire responses. If the errors array in a GraphQL response contains anything, the response is treated as if it's useless. Some of the options we've discussed today result in errors being appended to the errors array if null is resolved for a field marked with a non-nullable designator. However, part of the intent of client-controlled nullability is that some users are indicating with non-nullable designators that they can handle partial results or opting into some sort of error state. Throwing out entire responses on account of client-controlled nullability errors isn't ideal, so client-controlled nullability becomes a pseudo breaking change for some clients. The question becomes, what would clients like to do to resolve this conflict, and what kind of information will they need to do it? So the first option is status quo. There is no error handling. There's no way to catch errors. errors produced by required designators act the same as those produced by SDL non-nullable fields. Yeah, there's that. Errors caused by client control nullability are treated as distinct from all existing errors. When a client uses client control nullability, they're indicating that they are capable of handling the error case. So client control nullability errors may be treated as less serious than other existing errors or treated as handled by default. There are some sub options for each of these. So we're talking about excluding errors from the errors array or include errors in the errors array if a flag is enabled on execution, or introducing a namespace field to all errors to allow clients to distinguish between them, or introduce a Boolean flag to all errors called is handled or something like that, which is true if an error is handled. All client controlled nullability errors would be is handled as true. Introduce a separate array of handled errors where all handled errors are placed instead of the existing errors array. So all client controlled nullability errors would be placed somewhere else. Each of these has different pros and cons, but this is an example with the namespace. This is an example with the is handled flag. And this is an example with the handled errors array. And then the last option is to introduce some query syntax to catch errors. Errors are caught by the nearest catching syntax. In the event that errors are not caught, they're treated as they would be in status quo. They end up in the errors array. In past discussions, the question mark, which has in the past marked fields as nullable, has done a double duty of also catching errors. For the sake of this, I'm trying to talk about them as if they're error handling and null propagation are separate things. So I'm using, oh, I linked to the wrong one. No, I linked to the right one. Yeah, so I'm using this sort of catch directive as this is the stand-in syntax until we decide on something else. So in this case, this catch would do one of the previous options we discussed to a field marked with client-controlled nullability. And in this case, it would catch all errors or all client-controlled nullability errors produced by fields, child fields. And this would catch nothing. So there's no errors.
Does the catch directive make it nullable as well, so that it can be the place where it's caught?
So in this case, no. I was trying to separate the two discussions, and I want to talk a little bit about why I'm doing that. Basically, I feel that returning null means that data is missing, but data being missing is not necessarily the same thing as there being an error. And there being an error won't necessarily cause data to be missing. So I feel like these are two separate things. I also feel like we've been talking about error propagation. And I want to point out that nulls propagate. Null will propagate to parent fields, but errors do not actually propagate. If an error is produced by a field, it's sent directly to its error array and it has no impact on its parent fields. So I think talking about these two sets of behaviors separately is something that I thought was important. But I'll open the floor. I want to first ask again if any of these options are blockers for you or your use case.
I mean, I think based on our previous conversation, this first one probably isn't compelling anymore. That as long as we're in the domain where an exclamation point is not just a modification of a type, but also when that modified type is invalidated, like produces a special kind of error that bubbles in a different way, then you probably need some way to handle that. It can't always just float up to the top and blow up your whole query.
But it doesn't blow up your whole query, right? You still get the query data with the null propagated to where the null needs to be propagated to. You just also have an error in the error array, right?
Right, but yeah, that's true. The issue that's been raised is that some of the clients treat any errors as blow up the whole query.
I don't think that's too big of an issue, honestly, because even in this world where you have, client control, like you have the exclamation point and question mark, any client that uses that, if we stick errors in the error array when, it blows up and is caught, that seems fine. A client could still say, oh, even in that case, I want to blow up. And that's fine. Like that's the client making an explicit choice. I don't think we should over pivot on some clients blow up when they don't need to.
Yeah, I mean, the handled errors thing looks like we're now being opinionated about something that clients can decide on. If you just have an errors array, they can look at each error and say, oh, this error is a CCN error, that's fine, I'll ignore it, or I'll, expose it, but not blow everything up. And if you put handled errors, now we're making the server opinionated about how clients should handle that. It's just unnecessary.
So part of the problem is that there isn't really an explicit way for a client to tell where errors are coming from, aside from looking at the error message, but the error message isn't dictated by the spec. So there's no way
there's a pass in the error.
There's a what?
There's a pass in the error.
There is a path. Yeah, there's a path. That is one way that they could do it maybe.
And the pass tells you which field it blew up. The other question is if you have a list and there you're producing errors, and it could be a lot of errors that overwhelm you, and maybe because you're producing these, you say, okay, I put a question mark on a nullable field, so in order to make clear that I only accept data that has this field filled. We have that in a list, it could produce a ton of errors and blow up our result. So there should be a way to discard these errors. Because I mean, you're catching anyway, or you put if you want to catch it, you put a question mark somewhere.
That's actually super interesting that this could be almost used as an attack vector, right? Because
exactly.
if producing the error produces much more data and information and is like much more costly for the server to do, and you've got you're requesting a list of 100 items that on the client, that those 100 items are all null, and you use the non-nullable syntax to force the server to spend more energy like producing errors for you. That's like a very...
I don't think it changes anything. You can just send the same thing, without any exclamation points, and force server to waste time and throw away the data, and the client throws away the data. I don't see how this exclamation point makes situation worse or better for a hacker.
Like Lee said earlier, the errors are exceptional. Like they aren't. Your schema should be designed in such a way that when you say something is non-nullable, it should not, in general, throw an error. So this is where a user knows that something is going to be null and then specifically states, this should not be null, and causes it to throw an error. That shouldn't be the case if we didn't have client-controlled nullability in the majority of cases.
Are we talking specifically about, not about how the query execution occurs or what comes back in the data field, but specifically what comes back in the errors array?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I guess I was feeling that, just having these be in the regular errors field was fine, and we would. I liked what was said about having a namespace on errors that would say like, oh, this is a CCN error, so you can ignore those. And that's not a huge deal, but when you do have a situation where you have hundreds of errors potentially now that wouldn't have been there before, you have to iterate through every single one of them and check if they're CCN errors to determine what you want to do there. And that might be a good case for having the handled
Hadn't thought about
errors.
the security vector here. That's fair, because in practice, it is the case that a lot of GraphQL servers, their execution path is highly optimized, but their error path tends to be on the slower side because they know that there's a reasonable trade-off there where errors should be rare and it's okay for them to be slow. But if the client can create errors, then the client can create slow behavior and there's a DDoS vector potential. That's interesting.
Let me remind you guys, I put there a big description of the situation the way I see it, and I think a lot of confusion comes here from the word error, as if the server fails at something. When, for example, you put exclamation mark at some field, the field is nullable in schema and on the server. So, and you say, I know it's nullable, but with this ID of the object, I expect it to be non-nullable. And you send it to the server. Server executes as normal up to the last step. It retrieves the data and is about to send it back. And then it says, okay, I need the client ask me to also check this. Okay, let's check. Okay, it's null. The assumption of the client, the assertion is wrong. It's not server errors. And talking about some error path here, it's not error path. It's just the question of executing assertion, client assertion at the end, and adding this message in the errors collection or somewhere else. By the way, you are wrong. Your assertion failed. Bye-bye. Right? And so if we're talking about this, I suggest to clearly kind of say that these are not errors. These are failed client assumptions.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and in the case that we have a question mark accompanying that, it may be the case that you fully expect some subset of data that you access to have a null there, and you just explicitly want to ignore that set and trim it at that question mark boundary, and that's expected behavior. I like this, the reframing of the terminology here from error to assertion, because that is a better description of what we're doing here. We're making a client-side assertion about the types that we want to be able to operate on and the types that we want to not operate on, and the query behavior that should happen as a result of that. The root problem, just to kind of restate it, please let me know if I'm off base. The root problem is existing clients make assumptions about that errors array, where just purely the existence of the errors array indicates that something may have gone wrong and it might not be safe to interpret that data. But if the client specifically put assertions in place and catches alongside those assertions, is it reasonable to introduce stuff to that array? Could that cause those clients to incorrectly assume that that data isn't trusted when it may be the fact that it is trusted?
Let me bring up the analogy. So let's say when we're sending something to the server, be it mutation or a query, we send some data, for example, to search or to update. And there is input data validation on the server. And let's say if you provided some invalid string somewhere, we return it as an error, right? So basically, there are two kinds of errors that we can return in errors collection. And unfortunately, we do not distinguish it explicitly. So there are client-side errors equivalent of bad request in HTTP. Something like everything is fine on the server, but your request is bad. And the other one kind of error is when the server itself failed, server error 500. So basically with this failed assertion, what we return is equivalent of the bad data. We're telling the client, you send essentially the bad request. You assume it will be not now. No, it's now. So I don't see any trouble when going along this way. I don't see any trouble to adding this response to the errors list, because it's telling the client you have a bad request with a bad assertion.
Yeah. I want to just real quick, we're at time and I don't want to cut into other people's time. Do people feel comfortable voting right now, or would you like to defer to the next meeting? I have enough to work off of at this point.
I think we should vote, at least for what we right now would like to see you go down just in case it matters, but like, I think this is probably where we're most of the things we've discussed. This is probably the most up in the air.
Yeah.
I'm not
I'd
even
like to
sure
make
the
this one-
options you presented here are like describe the space necessarily. You know,
Okay.
like I don't know that a vote here is going to be super helpful for you.
Yeah.
Just because
I'd li-
this is intermixing syntax, decision, errors array, behavior. I think you can probably take a crack at exploring it a little bit and then come back with a little bit more of a clear branching factor.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The null propagation vote's gonna change a lot. So I gotta figure stuff out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would like to just note really quickly that I think that the biggest issue here is having a massive amount of these errors would be very likely. And that could easily be solved by either doing something with valid assertions, but aggregating these errors. So you don't have an entire massive error object for every single one of these hundreds of errors. You just have one client controlled nullability error that has a list of here are all of the fields or the paths that did have an assertion failure. Instead of
That
having
sounds
hundreds of
much
errors,
better.
just one.
Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds much better, like an assertion error, and then list the. Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
Yeah. There's definitely room to explore that space.
But then,
yeah.
then guys, please pay attention to the discussion there in issue, because I raised all these arguments there, and it sounded to me like nobody read them. Essentially, for example, suggesting to treat it as assertions and regarding the errors, so that we don't run out of time here. We can discuss it there in the threads.
Great. If people want to put the option they'd like to select in the thing, it's non-binding. I'm not going to do anything with it, but it's good to know. And then yeah, we can move on to the next thing, and I'll record it.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Second Roman suggestion there. We'll take discussion back to the discussion threads you set up, Alex. Thanks for the structured conversation. That was super helpful.
Yep. Yeah, no problem. It's helpful for me too.
I'm gonna flip our agenda around a little bit just so that we can get through the graphical maintainers discussion, I think probably relatively quickly, and then we can use all of the rest of our time for stream and defer.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm presenting this, but at Ricky's request. Basically, like Ricky is looking to basically not spend so much time on the lead portions of graphical. So what that means is like being the sole person that all PRs have to go through, or being the sole person that any organization has to go through. So she's looking to ramp up a couple of other maintainers. I know Yuri is on the call and is, I believe, one of the people Ricky's currently ramping up. But yeah, basically this is just a call to graphical has a lot of momentum, has a lot of new has like gotten design people to come in with design background to redesign how it should look. And there's an existing roadmap with a lot of work in this space. It's very exciting, and we don't want to we want this graphical to be healthy enough that a leader in the space can kind of step back from their organizing role, and there is still forward momentum.
I do want to mention that Tim Suchanek reached out to me and expressed interest in helping here, and asked for a little bit of my time to help explain to him what he needed. I invited him to this meeting. I think unfortunately he wasn't able to make the time, but hopefully he can in the future. But that's at least one person that has done good stuff in the community before, may be helpful.
I think that he is the other person that Ricky has begun to ramp up, or like has talked to. I'm not 100% certain, but even if there are a couple people, the more people who are interested and who are like active, probably the better for now, especially as there's an opportunity to get a lot of ramp up and a lot of context dumps. And it's probably better to like have that context dump across a few people.
Agreed. If anyone here is interested in contributing to that, or if you've got a coworker who's looking for some cool open source stuff to work in, yeah, send them our way. My hope is that between Yuri and Tim, that we'll have some good leadership in place, and we'll be able to activate a bunch of folks who just want to be able to, you know, chip away at stuff.
Yeah, so at the guild we are helping out with graphical v1 maintenance, and we would love to like take more roles and help out with the v2 and whatever needs to be done. So yeah, let us know if there's anything we can help with.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully we can make some progress relatively soon. Like I was mentioning, I'm gonna sit down with Tim sometime next week and just hear from him what he's able to do personally, and then maybe sometime between now and our next call, we can reboot the graphical working group subcommittee thing and spool people up and get us discussing. Thanks for making sure that didn't fall through the cracks, Matt. All right, Rob, we'll let you have the remainder of the time. Stream and defer.
Hey, so I wanted to go over a little bit more about what we talked last month. This was how to handle non-nullable errors that bubble up in stream and defer payloads. Just background of the issue is with non-nullable behavior, the error should bubble up to the first nullable field. That may be in a previous payload or in the initial payload, and can't go back in time and undo that. So I think that there was like general consensus that putting defer in stream acts as a null boundary, kind of because it has to. There was a question of how to distinguish between a null result and a null result that should have continued to bubble up. That is not really an issue for defer payloads because defer is only allowed on fragments. That means that every defer payload should be an object in the data field. And if it bubbles up all the way, we can return a null there instead. And you will then know that that's what happened. For stream, the proposal has been that the data field in stream is the list item. If that bubbles up all the way to null, it's potentially ambiguous if was that a null data result or should it have continued bubbling up to the list. So there was a suggestion that stream payload data could be wrapped into an array that would have another point where that could be nulled out. That was also brought up that it could be potentially useful for handling batches of results. So I wanted to go through, I got some feedback from Joe Savona of the Relay team that I wanted to go over. I was hoping he'd be able to make it, but I don't think he can. So I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, so just like a example of what we were discussing last month is that data, instead of being an object, we're wrapping it in an array. And the idea was that that would unlock batching of stream results. So Joe is asking that we consider the fragment, the named fragment response proposal that's also ongoing, which would allow someone to distinguish if it was needed. And that I think that it did kind of seem like it was an edge case for clients that would want to make that distinction. And he had an example of what that would look like here. And I think another interesting thing that he brought up was that the way that Facebook handles batching is by instead returning arrays of these payloads instead of specifically having an array of the stream data. And the benefit of that is that it allows you to batch together payloads from both defer and different streams instead of just data from a single stream. So I kind of want to hear if anyone else has thoughts on this.
Hey, so I just wanted, to explore that a little further in terms of the different types of batching. I managed to put together an implementation that can do both, and I think there's definitely a benefit to doing both. From what I understand in his comments, he's able to say basically that we send all the payloads that are ready at the same time, but a client might want to say, I only want batches of stream payloads 10 at a time, or only need them 10 at a time or 100 at a time. And in that case, we can reduce the number of payloads that are sent. So it's not just so it's two different types of altogether. So it's like two different types of batching that both are going to be useful. I also put in the chat, I put in a link to what currently I'm doing in terms of the different syntaxes. That's the right grammar for batched and parallel streams. I riffed off of the @index suggestion and added like an @indices field for describing the locations of all the different ones when they're sent, all the different results that are sent when they're sent, as they're ready or quote in parallel.
Is it always batched, or is the client requesting it to be batched? Because if you batch it this way, you might also have like waiting time. So it's not always that two contents may be ready or two payloads ready at the same time. Are you then saying I want to batch at least this amount of items, or is client requesting?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly how they implemented it at Facebook. I mean, what I took from his suggestion is that the client overall would have to dictate, how many payloads they want at a time, and the server would take a look at how many are ready and send them at a time. But I don't think it would be easily definable on a per operation basis. But when you're using the stream directive, to batch and say, listen, hold off, don't send me, any items until you reached a certain size, then you can sort of indicate, I guess, on an operation basis, how many, how large the batch is. That gives you also additional flexibility there.
I think there's two related but subtly different things happening there. One is a client expressing intent. And Rob, check me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Stream already has this functionality in place, right? Where you can say you want to describe the number for the first payload, the number of items to be in that first payload. That's it. So that's part of it. I think Facebook's Meta's, I don't know if they still have this, but at some point I knew they had flexibility in like describing the size of each subsequent payload as well. But that was like purely through the lens of what should the end user experience be? Like, do you want to see them come in big chunks, or do you want to see them come in one at a time? It's like customer perceivable. So you want client control. The other related but subtly different is the server may have multiple pieces of data ready simultaneously. That may be for things like your database supports streaming, and it also supports streaming in chunks, and it gives you 5 rows simultaneously, and the server makes a decision that it's going to be more efficient to operate fetching for all 5 of those in parallel rather than to do them one at a time. And you want to preserve the server's capability to have that flexibility so that it can optimize its performance, in which case you don't want to then kind of break it right at the delivery point and split it up into a bunch of tiny payloads, because that might also have client-side performance consequences. So the client wants to be able to specify some intent about constraints around batching, either in the initial batch or subsequent batches. I think the initial one is what's most important. And then the server wants to be able to payload those in whatever chunk sizes is most efficient for it to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on it in the reference implementation. I'm not like completely satisfied with what I have built just yet. But I was thinking something like if we support returning async iterables from resolvers, and those could return batches of items, and all of the fields underneath it are synchronous, then when the client asks the GraphQL server for the next result from its async iterable, you would have a bunch of payloads that are ready, and they would all be sent in an array. And so so there doesn't need to be any like delays introduced for that. Does that make sense?
Do you have a link to the PR that you are doing?
No, I don't have it.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, because if you are highly parallelized executing stuff, it could be efficient to have a delay there, right? But I mean that's implementation specific of the server. The question was more for me, if you do such a thing, does the client somehow have control over, I want it batch for efficiency, or just really send me the stuff as you get it, which causes more updates, but I want it as fast as possible. Could be.
Were you saying something, Lee? You were muted. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that like there's in the reference implementation, we probably shouldn't have like any kind of delays, but it'd be easy enough to add some kind of wrapper around that async iterable that where if you did want to like wait I don't know, some amount of time before for anything else, like that could be something in the network layer if it was needed. But I mean, I guess I'm curious about everyone's opinion on specifically like should we like explore this updating the proposal to support multiple payloads coming back in array versus or should we consider it only like on the stream payload having multiple results there?
I mean, what do we have to do it now, or is it something that we can add on later? I mean,
I think we're considering this again because the two topics of batching and what to do about to distinguish between like a null that bubbled up, when you have a list of non-nullable items and one of them is null. So what we decided last meeting was to, that case should be the data property should be set as null, and otherwise it'll be an array of items. And so that question of how to deal with that issue and whether we're gonna support batching, those are kind of interrelated because that was how we decided to support that issue. But, so now I guess if I'm understanding you right, I'm saying that maybe we could adopt what Joe was saying is sort of no longer really use the array and maybe use batching in a different way. And so that's how the topics are related.
But the one batching is batching on stream, like having an array as a stream payload, and the other thing would be even batching together stream payloads together with defer payloads possibly, and sending essentially these down the stream that are different processed items that you would then merge and send in one go down, as I understood it.
Agreed. There are slightly different types of batching. I mean, maybe I'm not thinking through them entirely. I think they're both useful. I don't know what Joe would respond to that.
Because the latter one, where you batch two payloads together, you have to also send down two passes. Essentially, you have to give two patch informations down because these payloads could go into totally different places in the graph, in the result graph.
Yeah, that's correct.
So it sounds like the batching that we also are doing with other things of HTTP, where you send in two requests, get two results back in one go. So yeah. Could this be implemented later? Do we need to
So
to do that now?
That batching is not required to do right now. Joe's saying if you're going to do batching, why not do it with the basically multiple responses in the same batch? And that's fine. I think the reason we're having this discussion at all is not that we necessarily want to implement multiple batching immediately, but even though it sounds like I think Yakov has managed to do that, but rather that we want to know, do we have basically some form of result rather than just the raw value in the data? And one value for a result object would be as an array, which then gives us the option value in the future to support the stream batching within the array.
Yeah, but the question is, if you have the array, then you would need to move the path into the array, or? Because the other batch means that you have to have the path and the data together, because you need to know where to patch that in.
Yes.
What I mean is the current batch result structure that we have for stream is different from the structure that we are talking now about, this kind of batching. I mean, it could be marriage, but it's two different things in the end.
Right. That I think Matt summarized why we're talking about this, and I think for me the question is, we had said previously that, like, if we add this array wrapper around this object, that's a convenient thing to do to handle bubbling, and it also might be useful for batching later. But I wanted to first, I guess, address the point of, if we're thinking, I mean, Facebook had clearly thought that handling batching this other way was better. And so I wouldn't want to make the wrong decision there, thinking that we could do something later when that's not actually the right path to go down.
Yeah, I'm less worried about that. Like, it's very easy to implement the Joe's form of batching. Like, it doesn't require any syntax changes. It doesn't require any like real logical adjustments besides the server needs to know that it can send multiple payloads all at once. And like clients might need to be able to handle in the same response getting two different JSON objects, like side by side, that are not part of some like list, which that's fine. But the real question that I think have to resolve is what does data null mean? Is it okay if that means, if we overload it, and it means both, and it can mean both, there was an error or there's some problem, like the data itself didn't come back, that like this stream has some failure, and also this stream or like this stream item is null.
I think it's essential that the stream payloads allow the actual data values to be wrapped in a list, because if we have to specify, imagine just returning like 3 or 4 levels deep in your GraphQL, you return a list of strings that you're streaming. If you have to specify the path and index of each of those strings, that's a quite significant increase in the size of the payloads to do that. So I think we should wrap it with a list at that inner data level, which then means if there is a null there, it means the same thing as it does for defer. So I think it solves those 2 problems with one stone. Whether or not we also wrap the payload itself in a list as well, I think the inner one definitely needs one.
Yeah, I know I'm less attuned to this than Joe, so it would be great if we like verify with Joe, but this does feel like a place where, because of the way Facebook handles nulls and lists where we basically just gobble them up in almost all cases. Like it almost never happens that we have a null in a list. We basically missed this substantial edge case, and I think it's reasonable for open source to say, hey, we actually do have to handle this edge case. And this is a reasonable thing for us to like backport and fix.
Yeah, I mean, just to argue Joe's side, I guess, because he's not here, I'll do my best to understand it. I think what he's saying is there's some redundancy, because if the field is nullable, then it can never happen that the whole array will be null, right? Because the whole array could be initially null, but in a subsequent payload, we've already the cow is out of the barn. Is that an expression? So it can no longer be null. In a subsequent payload, the whole list can't be null. And if the list items are let's see, what case did we do? We did if they're not nullable, right? We did that. So if they are nullable, then we're never going to have the whole list be null. So both cases are sort of mutually distinct. And if you have knowledge of the schema, meaning if the client has knowledge of the schema, they can be able to tell the difference between the two. So that's what he was saying if we don't have batching. Now, I happen to be a proponent of having the batching here, so, but I do see his point there. But my only concern would be, it just looks, again, it's a little bit redundant, but it looks nicer to me, if the payload can be like read on its own, like as to whether there was an error that bubbled up or not. I mean, I just tend to prefer that, even though there is some redundancy.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That if it's null and the item is non-null, if the inner items are non-null, then you know for sure there's an error. Yeah, that does make sense. And that's the only point, presumably, where you would end up with a null on data where it means that the list is like a problem.
Okay, so I definitely would like to avoid supporting batching up front and hoping that it could be something that's added later. So do we think that it's a viable path to go forward, that we do just ship with in a stream payload? The data is always wrapped in an array. There's always one element to it. And if that element was non-nullable type and it returned null and it bubbled up, we could return null for that entire data as a result for data.
Yes, and then this is
Agreed.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, I don't know how much Joe cares, but if this is the best thing for open source, and I think we have batted down that it is, then I don't see a real problem with this.
I mean, batching can still be done, or we can still look later at batch how we solve the batching case. But I also think if we get the basics in first, we don't get lost in solving those two problems together.
Right, and I guess what I was concerned about with the with like batching the whole payloads is if we don't do that originally, then the API for GraphQL is always an async iterable of payloads. But if we want to change it to an async iterable of either payloads or array of payloads, should we like do that? Just say that it could, that could be the case upfront and then put off a potentially breaking change later, or is it worth the?
Yeah, I see it. Because the other thing is I think it was brought up that this does change, like, right, the async interval bit. Does it make more sense to just leave it? Yeah, this is hard. I don't know. Sorry.
All right, I'll think about it some more. I'll write some more code maybe.
It's also data might, when it's this list, data might not be the right word either. It might be the case that it should actually be something like items if it's a list. At which point it's like, well, if it's items, then that we could already like future support that. We could keep data being the singleton item, and
which I kind of like because it's more clear, right? Data is
Yeah.
always an object, and items is actually an array.
Yeah, and
So-
then but
I
if we
think the
have
word
that,
data is plural, just saying.
Yeah, but I think it's more about data at the moment in the spec is said to be always an object.
No, I'm just joking,
and
just
every
joking.
okay.
So one of the things that I was thinking about just now, which I've not actually thought about before, was typically with GraphQL, if you have a client that doesn't necessarily know what the query is, right? Just issues a query to the server, it gets the response back, and then it knows what to do with it because the response has enough data in it to tell it what to do. That's already the case for GraphQL currently. But if you add the defer and stream, and now you're saying, here's the path, it's person films, and here's the data, we don't know necessarily whether to overwrite it or whether to append it to the list. So the at index that Rob's put in here now is fine and indicates, oh, it's got an at index, so it's got to be an append, but it's also kind of redundant because you've already received, we've guaranteed that they're in order. So we already know what index will be next. If you go with what you've just proposed and use the data and items, then it's clear that an items gets appended, a data gets merged.
I would say yes, but wasn't there a discussion last meeting where Lee did say some special case where it's not only that there might be an option that it's not appended, but maybe inserted like a sec or something.
Yeah, so I think maybe we're getting hung up on data. What if the key was item, singular, just item?
Yeah.
Then we would know, okay, this is one thing. And if item is null, that's fine. Then we can say, oh, if item isn't there, is unset, then it's an error. And it's not symmetric in the same way that it is with defer. But if the actual like key is its own independent thing, then maybe that's like it's kind of, we're like working ourselves in circles because we want the symmetry between them. And I think Lee was a huge proponent of having that symmetry between defer and stream and what data being null means and data being unset means. But maybe stream is different enough that it deserves its own naming. I don't know.
I mean,
And
I think that would work, you know, if it was called item and it was absent. I mean, we considered having data possibly be absent for stream payloads also, and sort of breaking that symmetry. And that is another option.
Like,
I mean,
basically,
to me, like I made a joke. So, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, I was just saying, if we're going to break symmetry, maybe we should really break symmetry.
Yes,
Yeah,
I definitely agree with
but-
that. We should not go halfway.
Yeah, it could solve a lot of issues that we have for the client really understanding what has to be done, right?
You know, guys,
I
I
would
feel like we are trying over specify. My main question: does it all these details and strict restrictions? Do they have to be in the spec, in the standard? Because I can think about so different situations when all this can be used. Remember that it's not like our spec is directly executed. There is a server framework. Then there is the server, which is used, for example, for things like, one thing is Facebook. When I scroll down my stream, probably there would be some stream. I see that things appear out of order because I'm down in my stream, but the freshest news appear right there, out of order, technically. But they go out of order. If I close Facebook open, they will appear on top, right? Or, for example, the stream of stock quotes, they're completely different. And probably the server, when they implement particular endpoint or the field or whatever, they will have to specify essentially how it works. And for them, for example, if we missed something, how we will probably deliver it later, right away. If some our partners had a glitch for a few seconds, we will miss their data, but we will deliver them first. And the clients will have to build around this, but it will be server specification for particular case, how they will handle all these details. I think we should provide generic framework and say that some servers can do this, follow strict, order. Some can put null somewhere and deliver it later, and so on, because there are so many different situations out there that it's impossible right now to come up with a one thing that works for everybody.
Yeah, I think given there are so many situations, it's really, really important that we're very specific on what the spec change actually is. I think that is actually why it's so valuable.
Also, the clients need to know how these results come back. Do they need to buffer? Do they not need to buffer? And I think we made a lot of these things clear.
Do we, Rob, do you want to move to the last point about label, or do you want to keep going about in a circle on this?
Yeah, let's see if we can just spend a few minutes on this. Yeah, so this came up about validating the label fields. The idea is that clients provide a label to defer and stream. It should be unique, and then the label is spit back out on the payloads that match up with the directives, and that's how the clients can match up where what payload belongs to, came from which directive. We did say a while back that label could be optional. If you're just a client that doesn't care, you don't send it, you don't get it back. The spec that as of right now says that if you do send it, you get back whatever you put in. I think I had made I think I mentioned that they should be unique in the spec, but there's no validation for that. That does run into a similar issue that we were talking about validating initial count, whereas if you have an argument and it's provided as a variable, you can validate it because variable validation rules don't have access to that because they may be run not at the time of execution. So I was wondering, is it worth having validation for this? Should we raise a field error during execution? Or is there really any reason where you wouldn't want the label to be static? That might be a little weird, but could we validate?
I feel like you should just require them to be static. What value do you get from having labels be variables if the whole point is to have a priori knowledge of which ones go where?
Right.
If
I
I'm
couldn't think of
sending
one,
this,
but
I can think of one. If I'm sending the same query multiple times with slightly different arguments, there is a world in which a client would use the labels from different query, like the label would be an incremented count that gets passed in as a variable, so that I could differentiate between two different queries of the same name with that have different values that I want to be merging. I'm not sure that is in fact actually valuable, because presumably the streams for those two different queries are coming back in different callbacks. So
Yeah, I feel like it opens a can of worms. Like if you have to have runtime checking that,
yeah,
like you have to globally look at everything in the query to see if multiple of these exist and that their labels aren't going to conflict. Also, like, I'm still not sure I totally understand the value of the label argument. Like, is it just to uniquely represent these? Can we do that with the path into the query? Like, it seems like
you can't do it with path, because you could have the same field with two different defer, or like you could end up with the same field being deferred in two different places.
But I mean, in the
But you
not
could-
in the not
you-
in the response path, but in the query path. Like follow, if you were to crawl the AST, each of these have a unique location in the AST of the query itself, right?
We don't use
It's
the
more-
AST path though, do we? We use the
Response path.
yeah.
Yeah, it's more like a fragment identifier could help. Like if you know,
Yeah.
okay, this deferred fragment is fulfilled, so you can emulate that. I think Matt showed that with the is fulfilled, and then you alias the type name. Like
Yeah, but we
this could
definitely,
help.
yeah, we definitely use the label though. We 100% use it.
Well, I mean, I'm convinced that you use it. I'm just saying that I don't understand how you use it.
As Michael was saying, it's basically because we don't have keyed fragments, so we use it to say which fragment got a fulfillment or not.
We actually went away from the label in the .NET client that we are doing, because so we are actually using the workaround that you stated. So we have an alias type name field, because there you have an if on the defer, and sometimes it's not deferred, and we still have to recognize is the fragment immediately fulfilled, or maybe the server says, okay, I have the data immediately, I send that down in the first initial payload. So the label is not that valuable in the end. The keyed fragment is much more valuable.
Yeah, I agree.
To dig back to Rob's, I think Rob has had a couple sub questions here. Like should label be required? Clearly we're deriving some value from having label. I think that's fine. But my read on it is it sounds like a hack because we don't have some other feature in there rather than like a core to the behavior of defer and stream working. And maybe that's why I didn't understand how it was getting used.
Right. I think that's the right read.
And if that's the case, then it seems crazy to me to require them to say like, hey, there are clients out there that need this hack. Therefore, everyone must add this thing, even though they don't understand what it's for. I think it would be tough for us to stand by that decision. But for the ones where we have them in there, certainly I think having some rules around making sure that we don't step over our own feet and cause additional confusion via a validation rule makes a lot of sense.
And that would mean that also a validation rule that it has to be static and can't be derived from a variable.
That would be my pitch. I just
Yeah.
feel like we're opening a can of worms of complexity by making it possible to put a variable at the place of a label.
Yeah,
It also seems to be not the thing that you're using it for. So
yes, this is correct.
And I like that, because that if we do demonstrate a need for it later, then it's non-breaking to remove it. But so
Yeah.
I think I'll go ahead with that.
And if I can back up and generalize it, let me know if this is the wrong characterization. Like if we were to describe this in a way that wasn't, like this is a hack because some clients use it for this weird purpose. The generalized way to frame it would be, if you want to look at the payloads coming in your streamed response and link them to specific nodes in your AST for where defers and streams occurred, label is the way in which you tie those two together. Is that right?
Yeah, this
That's
is
so much nicer.
for very legacy GraphQL, given GraphQL is now 10 years old. This is the equivalent of like client mutation ID.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that. It was Relay Classic, oh?
Yeah.
No, there's definitely inherent value there. And I can imagine future clients also leveraging this in different ways to be able to say, I don't know, maybe they have some client local additional directive that describes like loading indicator behavior or something specific like that, and you want to know when a particular deference stream has completed. That makes sense.
Yeah, but because because we can omit that, you do. I think you cannot really do that because the server can decide not to send the deferred payload, and then send it in the initial result. So when you wait for the label, you will never get this hint that this label is fulfilled. That's why I said that's why we moved for our client to the keyed fragment approach, which is actually more useful because you know a certain fragment is fulfilled, and you know at that level this is fulfilled, so you can update your store.
Do I understand this correctly? We had said that while the label was optional, if you did pass it, it's the spec that the server has to give it back as is. And what was that? But is there still a case where that wouldn't happen, or where what Michael was saying would happen, or?
In a case that
what Michael's saying is, sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead, man.
Sorry. Yeah, what I was saying is, I think what Michael's saying is because you can choose not to adhere to stream at all, like you can receive the stream directive and not stream, you just return the data as part of the original payload, the key might never arrive. The label, sorry.
Do we want to have an indication of the labels that are about to get deference stream behavior? Like right now we have this indication that the server understands what you're talking about because we have this has next, where if the server just ignores the directives, you won't see has next. And if you imply that the absence of it means that there is no next, then that makes sense. If you see has next is true, then you know that there's going to be additional payloads coming, but the server also has some indication of what deference stream boundaries were.
Yeah, what the
encountered,
difficulty,
right?
What the difficulty here is so the server can say, okay, you deferred actually fields that we already have when you come to that point.
Yeah.
So I'm sending these fields in the initial payload, but there still might be other defers that come. So you will get maybe a has next, but the label that you're waiting for will never come because it's fulfilled in the first request. There's some labels that come, but the label is not a
yeah, that's what I mean. Like, should we, in addition to having this has next field, have an additional thing that's like deferred labels or something like that? That's an array of, like, if it exists in that array, then that means that one of the subsequent payloads is also going to have that label and kind of close it out of your list. Just to give you both of the bookends of like, yep, you are waiting on that, and okay, now you are no longer waiting on that. But I don't know. I don't want to like invent new behavior if it's unnecessary, especially if kind of the purpose of this is for a specific use case. But Michael, you bring up a good point. and if that is exposing some surface of bad behavior in the clients that are already leveraging some version of this, I don't know, maybe we've misunderstood something.
Yeah, I mean, for the relay team, Matt, if I understand you correctly, for you also would be the keyed fragment feature actually the better solution.
It would be. That's, we've sort of like, it would be the better solution. It's just not what we've actually done, and it would be a pain in the neck to actually do it.
Okay, I understand.
Is this?
Yeah. It's a mutation, Annie. That's a good analogy.
Either way, I think it's okay to say that label shouldn't be required. That's sorry for that ended up being a long-winded discussion, but that's what I wanted to poke at there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I can move forward with having the validation role to enforce that if label is provided, it's static and it is unique. And then I think I'll assume that that's okay moving forward, and we could, I mean, having more fields on about saying that like this, like you were saying, if these are fragments are already fulfilled or something, that's something that could be added in a non-breaking way later. So I feel like
Yeah,
it shouldn't block.
it's a separate feature,
Yeah.
I would say.
Okay. I don't want to take up any more time.
All right. No worries. Thanks for digging through all of that. That was quite a lot of surface area to discuss. Thank you for continuing to push all of these pieces forward. All right, folks, I think that's all of our agenda. I know we're a little bit over time. Appreciate everybody staying on. We'll wrap things up. Thanks everybody for your good conversation. We'll see you guys again next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.